Welcome to Conversation with the Geographer. We're really fortunate to have Dr. Dydia DeLyser at California State University, Fullerton, an associate professor of geography. Dydia, thank you so much for joining us.
It is such a pleasure, Mike. Thank you so much for inviting me.
This is wonderful. I'm really glad you were able to make arrangements to visit us today. And like many of these interviews, I'm going to ask you about what sparked your interest in geography from childhood on, perhaps? Is there anything that really captivated you while you were growing up?
It's a great question. I think everyone answers it differently because we all come to geography through such unusual paths, since it's almost no one's initial undergraduate major. It actually was mine, but it was almost accidental. Both my parents were immigrants from Western Europe. And so I grew up with all my family overseas and with periodic visits to grandparents and other family, and just traveling a lot and just being really enamored of traveling the world, and had lived in Europe and traveled Europe and Asia before I became an undergraduate. And then randomly, my mother got a fundraising phone call from UCLA, where I chose to be an undergraduate. I was still living in Amsterdam, and she got this fundraising phone call, cold call, and because my dad had been a graduate student there in nuclear physics long before. And so they said, she just started talking with the young guy on the phone, and he told about the geography department's ecosystems program. And I was very much interested in studying environmental issues. And so my mother called me up in Amsterdam and said, "This is really great. You're going to love this." And so I said, "You're right. This is fabulous. This is just what I want." So I enrolled immediately as a geography major. They had the two foci, regular plain geography, and they had geography ecosystems. And it took a couple of years, but I switched to become a regular geographer and a human geographer, because I realized that it was always people that made me tick. I cared a lot about the environment, and but through everything, it wasn't the plants or the earth systems that really inspired me. It was people.
That's a wonderful story. I don't know how many people could say their mother picked their major for them,
Well, she didn't pick it. It was that cold call fundraiser guy. So,
okay.
She just relayed the message.
Fair enough. Why don't you comment on some of the more inspiring professors you had at UCLA? There are certainly plenty of them.
I was really fortunate. I was able to work with some people who are no longer there, have left, have passed away. But I have always found inspiration and mentorship and good advice comes from all directions, and it need not come from somebody who's directly in my area. So I was in my first introductory physical geography class, I was very inspired by Tom McKnight, because he taught from a textbook that he had authored. Mm-hmm. And in it, the thing that caught me was there were pictures from absolutely all over the world that he had taken, and he would use even more slides in class to illustrate everything he was talking about. And I just thought, man, that is fantastic. And I went to him for advice on some travels through California. What would I see? And he suggested books to read, and really got me started on an incredible, path in my career, in my life.
He was certainly an exemplary geography educator, and his textbook is still in,
yep,
I think it's 13th, 14th edition, and it's a great teaching tool.
It is.
And who else?
The person who inspired me really the most in historical and cultural geography was Kit Salter, mm-hmm. Who left UCLA for other destinations not long after that. I just mm-hmm. was really inspired by the way that he taught students to understand communities and to understand cultural geography. And he just had he had a spark that I also found really contagious. So those were the two main people from my undergraduate years. But more important were people outside of geography. I had the tremendous good fortune in my very first quarter as an undergraduate. I was advised to look at a page in the catalog, no internet in those days, and this is in the mid 80s. I was advised to look at a page in the course schedule that listed undergraduate seminars. Usually they were in the history department, but they could be anything. And there was one being offered in my very first quarter about the history of the Spanish Civil War, and it was taught by a Spanish Civil War veteran named Abe Osheroff. And that class, and getting to know Abe and having him as a close friend and mentor for the rest of his life transformed my life. And he was very active in the lives of his students and really sought to inspire us to say, what do you want to do to make the world better? And how are you doing that right now?
That's great.
So that was more transformative and more important than almost anything else that anyone has ever taught me.
So you took that message to heart.
Yes.
And
I hope so.
Well,
I think I did it in very different ways. I never served in war. Abe volunteered to serve in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade in the Spanish Civil War. He'd already been a veteran of protest organization. He's from New York City. He then served in World War II. He then was a significant player in the civil rights movement. He went on to do construction projects in Latin America to build housing when economies and governments' political situations were changing there in ways he thought positive. He also had to really rethink his life. He began as a very devoted communist. And after seeing what Stalinism did to communism in the Soviet Union, he quit the Communist Party, but continued working for what he saw as a revolution and working for human good and human rights and peace and huge issues that he saw as really important. And that always really inspired me, but I didn't see myself as volunteering. There wasn't a Spanish Civil War in my day, but I've always seen my work as deeply connected to issues of local significance and importance and trying to make a difference. I learned from Pete Seeger, who was one of the people who inspired me from when I was a very small child. I learned from Pete Seeger to try to make an impact locally and make positive change, do positive things locally. So I've always tried to have my research be engaged with a community, and I won't say work for change that I have wrought, because it's not about my decisions or me. It's about what the community wants and what I can bring to the table. So I feel that I've tried to take Abe Osheroff's advice and put it into my life in a different way.
That's very intriguing, and it makes me think about some of the research you conducted while you were a graduate student. Would you like to talk about it?
Thank you. It's very much connected to that. All my research has always been deeply connected to my life, and it all started it really all started early in my undergraduate career. My first book, called Ramona Memories, published in 2005. I'm still doing research connected to that topic. This is a research collection of souvenir teaspoons, all related to the novel Ramona and its characters and the places. So I'm still connected to that. But before I published a book, it was my master's thesis in the 90s. Before that, it had been my very first undergraduate term paper. And that also was in a transformational class it was in the library school, called Research with Primary Resources, California History Without a Textbook. And we had to do research in the Department of Special Collections. I was so inspired by doing that at the end of the seminar, I asked the head of the department for a job, and I worked there for 8 years and learned how to process, essentially catalog, but it's called processing archival collections. Worked with some of the great collections in that incredible library, things like Raymond Chandler's papers and Anais Nin, just a lot of really, really incredible collections, some famous, some little known, and gained a lot of experience that would set the path forward for my own archival research. It was also when I was early in my undergraduate career that I started working as a seasonal maintenance worker at Bodie State Historic Park. I would end up writing my PhD dissertation about that. So that work still continues to make an important place in my life. I serve on the board of their nonprofit foundation, and have been able to bring together my scholarship from my dissertation, my years of swinging a hammer and doing stabilization work, with my own hands, and my understanding of preservation, and bring that to the board and to public presentations for the state park. Work on their National Historic Landmark updated application, things like that. So the work that I started very early on is still very much with me, and I'm still very much involved in the communities from my very earliest research, and then I've added on to that newer research. So, for example, about 12 or so. About a dozen years ago, when I decided I wanted to start doing research on how neon signs transformed the American landscape, I decided from the outset that I wasn't just going to parachute in from outside, but that I wanted to become an insider in the community and see what it was that the community wanted and what they were interested in. So I've been on the board of the Museum of Neon Art ever since. I served on the board of the American Sign Museum for a term. And I've been able to do really a lot with the Museum of Neon Art, have been one of the important members of a little neon community conference called Neon Speaks, have published a book that is a public-facing, co-authored with my partner, Paul Greenstein, who makes and restores and designs and installs neon signs. So in other words, with a practitioner. So working between academic and practice-based knowledge in a conversation that we've been having for 30 years. So that work continues to be embedded in my life. My earliest work was also very connected to the earliest dates that same Paul and I went on. They were all related to my interest in research, and we went to Ramona locations, and we went up to Bodie. My first trip to Bodie was with Paul. And so all those things in my research ended up completely embedded in my personal life as well. And they've remained that way in a really rewarding sense for 35 years.
It's a wonderful story. It really is. Let's elaborate on Bodie for a minute, because you've discussed this notion of imagined landscapes with regard to Bodie and those who visit it. I think it's something that's rather profound, that is worthy of elaboration, especially as geographers. We attempt to understand the why of where and explore landscapes. Can you comment on this matter of imagined landscapes by each observer, if you will?
Well, I think that's been really, in some ways, I think one of the threads that has tied together all of the work that I've done over 35 years or whatever it is, including when I was an undergraduate, since important work that I've continued to do started back then. I've always been interested in how the past is made meaningful in the present, and what we choose to carry forward of the past, and where that comes from, and what it means that we're carrying certain aspects forward, and what it does. Right, what doors it opens and what doors it closes when we do it that way. That means that I've encountered a lot of situations where the past that's being put forward cannot be said to be accurate with things that actually happened. But that because they're not factually accurate, maybe even more important because they shed so much light on what it is that we want to learn and teach about ourselves and about the world that we live in now. In the case of Bodie, which is a ghost town, a gold mining ghost town up in the currently snowed in the high desert mountains of Eastern California. It's up above 8,000 feet. It has always been known for its Wild West past, its Wild West heritage, and that has been loudly proclaimed in an entire series of books and stories about the place. What's interesting about it is that many of the earliest residents of Bodie, those who survived to live to old age and talk about their lives, as they reflected, as we often do when we get older, we reflect back through rose-colored glasses and romanticize our own pasts. And so those very people who had been very young, in some cases children, in Bodie's very spectacular boom period, they reminisced later and helped not only romanticize Bodie's past, but they very much shaped they were part of the shaping of what became the Mythic West themselves. So a little town, I mean, there's 125 abandoned buildings left there now. So a comparatively little town has actually had, I mean, it wasn't always little, it had a large population in the late 19th century, but it has had an outsized role in shaping the way that we think about the 19th century American West. And my hope is that it can continue to have a really important role in shaping the way we will think about it in the future as we move beyond John Wayne and Clint Eastwood models of what the American West was like and can be thought about as we move to think about things like resource extraction and exploitation and unsustainable development. Bodie is, after all, a ghost town. So gold extraction is not sustainable. Farming usually works out. Right? Mining, not so much. It's usually temporary. In a world in crisis, we can learn a lot about a place like Bodie, which went through multiple crises and which ultimately was not sustainable as a way of life, and yet has been left for us very poignantly.
Well, it's fascinating because Bodie is a relic of the past that has been somewhat modified, I guess, but less so than anywhere else of its class of ghost towns that you've determined?
Well, Bodie has not been significantly modified since it became a park in 1962, and it was not really significantly modified for at least 30 years before then. There are no operating saloons. There's no business activity except for a museum store, which is the nonprofit that I'm a part of. So it's not. It actually hasn't been significantly modified, although it is significant, enormous effort to keep it looking unmodified. Those are efforts I eagerly
and here it is, a relic of the past that's essentially an artifact. And it seems to me, in looking at your work, you've explored artifacts really as emblems on the cultural landscape, whether it's a 60 Chevy pickup or a jackalope on the wall or something else. These artifacts evoke images and thoughts and spark one's imagination as to what might be. Comment on this matter of artifacts and in popular culture, if you would.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, I'm very, as you can see, I live, this is my home office, and I live with what I call a high artifact density. Other people call it clutter or hoarding. Right. But I love things, and I grew up loving things. I've always loved things. Each thing tells a story to me about who gave it to me or where I got it from or who it's connected to and what place it came from and is connected to and what journey or whatever, travel experiences. And so everything tells a story. And I've been very interested in how other people relate to things in similar ways. Not everybody does, but many people do. And this is true of large and small artifacts, right? So I've written about the souvenir teaspoons, which I've collected in large quantity, even though I'm fully aware that it's completely ridiculous, and that's the part of it that I enjoy the most. But I've written about also, the larger artifacts that carry a lot of cultural meaning, like antique motorcycles that, Indian motorcycles I've written about, of which my husband and I have a few that he has restored. Those have carried a lot of symbolism in American culture. Motorcycles in general have, and it's really interesting to see how those meanings have been shaped and evolved by a particular, again, just like in Bodie, there was a particular community that remembered their past and shaped the way Bodie would be remembered. There was a particular community that shaped the way that we would begin to understand Indian motorcycles and the way that they can be restored and the place that they have been able, that they've occupied culturally for Americans within the larger ecosystem of what does a motorcycle mean.
Absolutely. I remember when I was much younger than I am now, looking at these Indian motorcycles with what they call it, the suicide shift. Fascinating machines. Fascinating machine.
Suicide shift belongs to Harley Davidson's because of the way the controls were oriented. They both used shifts on the tank, but Indian had the shift on the tank and the clutch with different hands and feet, so that you didn't have to do two things on the same side of the bike at the same time. And Harley couldn't infringe on that patent, so they shifted things around, and it was much harder to learn how to operate a Harley. Now most people are used to it, and they don't use tank shift anymore. But the tank shift is a Harley Davidson innovation. The suicide shift is a Harley Davidson innovation. Tank shift was widely popular among other. Among all motorcycles at the turn of the 20th century. That's how you used a transmission.
Well, thanks for the tip. There's going to be somebody watching this who's going to need that clarification for some game show, I'm sure.
Well, I've become deeply embedded in the communities where I do my research, and as you know, inside of communities, the details that don't appear to matter outside of those communities are incredibly important. Indeed. And deeply relevant. And the communities are defined on the details and often defined on knowing the details.
Absolutely. No, the correction is warranted for sure.
Well, there was a long battle between Indian and Harley enthusiasts, so.
Let's chat briefly about your neon sign.
You mean my research on the neon sign industry and how neon signs transformed the American landscape? I was inspired by my husband Paul's work. He's restored a number of really important Los Angeles neon signs, and he's been making neon signs and designing them and installing them and restoring them for 45 years or so. So when I met him, he was already, I went on some neon jobs with him and I was really fascinated. And it was about a dozen years ago. I said, I could do some research on this. And it was one of these things. It was really similar to the work that I did on Bodie and also to my early work on Ramona. I found something that I was really interested in. And the first thing I did was, I'll just go read the book, the big fat book about this topic. And then I will know. And I looked and I couldn't find the book. It's like, did I look wrong? Did I not look in all the right places? And I kept looking and finally realized, no book. Oh, wait, that's an open door. So then I said, okay, well, then I guess I'll work on writing the book. So so I've been working on that for, for all this time. And meanwhile, with Paul, co-authored a short book that's for the community, for the public, 100 pages long with 200 color illustrations. So it's really a miniature coffee table book. In order to share, the point to me of having scholarly knowledge is to share it. Otherwise, I enjoy it for myself, but I really want to share it. So I realize not everyone is going to read a scholarly book. It's going to be long. It's going to take a bunch of more years before it's published, because we know that the pace of academic publishing is slow, and academic writing is slow, and academic research is slow because it takes so much work, right? So I thought, well, I want to get some of these ideas out there into the public right away. It was the pandemic. The Museum of Neon Art was struggling like all museums. I serve on their board. I said, let's write this short book and publish it with community partners, to other people who are really passionate about neon signs, who put their hearts and souls into the book. So it was a 4-person collaborative effort with profits to benefit the museum. And that's just been such a pleasure. And it's just really helped me to see how important community engaged scholarship really is to my life and the work that I want to be doing.
Well, I think geographers more often now really need to recognize that the work that we do really has to be delivered to the local community, and to specialists in some of these fields, as opposed to just maintaining our scholarship in the halls of academia, really. Let's chat. Go ahead.
I feel like, of course, at this point in my career, I agree with you because that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm prioritizing is community engaged and public facing scholarship. But at different parts of my career and for other people, I see that differently. I think that people doing biomedical research are doing very important work that doesn't, it won't have an application as the treatment I received for my cancer 5 years ago, until years after they started doing the research, right? And it would be purely science-based. It would be purely, scholarship-based for a long time. And I think that it's important for everyone to pace their career. I think that was one of the things that I had to think a lot about in being so inspired by Abe Oshoroff from the Spanish Civil War, was that he just always jumped right into the big fight, the good fight, as the Lincoln Brigade was called, very actively in the moment. But I feel like scholarship takes time, and becoming part of a community takes time, and it isn't always immediately apparent what the community contributions can be. And whenever I've entered into a community, I always have ideas of what I think I want to contribute, but what actually ends up happening always ends up being somewhat or completely different. And that's because it's collaborative. And so it's more and it's better than whatever I envisioned. And it takes time to build those collaborations, and it takes time to see what that contribution is going to be. So a lot of times I've wanted to focus on the contributions I know I can make as a scholar. And so those are scholarly contributions. And so whether that's writing papers for the annals or, whatever, for journal articles, that's been a very important part of my career at different times. And that helped me to establish my career as a scholar, as a geographer, as a scholar, and then give me the confidence to be able to reach out to help different communities that I'm part of, including our association, the American Association of Geographers, and doing what I consider important work with our association. So it's been at different times of my career that I've been able to do work that was very focused on other cultural geographers, other historical geographers, on qualitative research, and advancing, forwarding qualitative research, and fighting some of the good fights, because many quantitative scholars have been still trying to crush qualitative research, and that's not, I don't believe that's necessary. But I believe they can very fruitfully coexist, and I've been working really hard toward that. So, and that's a different community with a different community contribution that has happened at a different time in my career. So each one of these sprouts and grows and blossoms and flowers at a different time. But over time, I've been able to do more of that.
Well, you've been able to do a lot throughout your career, that's for sure. You've really engaged in quite a bit of field work yourself, and you've written on field work for the Geographical Review special issue. But let's talk about where you went after your PhD at Syracuse. You went to LSU? And
right. Well, I want to thank you for mentioning the special issue of the Geographical Review, because working with Paul Stars on, it was a double special issue. Yes, and a good friend. So we came from different kinds of geography, different ways of doing cultural geography and historical geography, and then put together, we had 57 invited contributions to that special issue. In order to get 57, we invited over 100. And those were all planned. We worked back and forth for months to create a list of 100 people on key topics, and we invited scholars to say something targeted that we knew engaged their work, and for them to think about particular issues in their field work. This was right around the turn of the 21st century, 1999. So we started the work in like 97, 98 probably. It came just as people were, nobody was talking about research methods. So many of the people we contacted said, you know what, I was just writing my big fat book on this topic and my publisher said, cut the methods chapter. So this is so great. I'm so great to have I'm so great to have an outlet to talk about these particular challenges from my field work. And so it was really, it turned out to be one of these things that just hit at an important moment. So I'm really, really pleased to have been able to be one of the two people who made that project happen.
Great. So
you mentioned
it certainly withstood the test of time. It remains valuable. But LSU, back to LSU. So you were at LSU.
So after being an undergrad at UCLA, I was an undergraduate for 6 years because I was enjoying absolutely everything to the utmost. I did study abroad in the Soviet Union after studying Russian for 2.5 years. I mean, that led to a lengthy undergraduate career that was very rich and inspiring for me. But then when I was ready to go to graduate school, I was really on fire and I was very focused. So I finished my master's and my PhD in 4 years, and then stayed one more year without filing my PhD because I otherwise would lose my health insurance. So I remained employed, and then was very fortunate to be able to get one of the only jobs for any. There were very few jobs in cultural or historical geography or even any human geography at all. So I was very fortunate to get a job at Louisiana State University, and I was there for 16 years before leaving.
16 years. And then you advised a number of students at LSU, served in their committees, learned a lot in terms of your advising, and then you went to Fullerton.
I did, yes.
Would you care to comment on any students you've had in the past that have inspired you?
All my students have inspired me in different ways. I learned so much. When I came to LSU, there had been a good deal of turnover among the junior faculty, and the graduate student population felt they were in crisis. I've now learned that happens a lot. So there were a lot of a group of graduate students who were left without advisors, and that's very, very hard when that happens. It had happened to me to some degree as well. and it was one reason I finished my PhD so quickly was I would lose my advisor if I didn't. I learned, for example, from one of my very first students, Jennifer Spites-Benet. She was raising a baby. She had a baby as she was working on her first, on her dissertation and doing her research, and was very focused on her child. I was not child focused. I didn't have a baby. I couldn't understand the distractions, and I was less tolerant of the incredibly compelling life and the major commitment that she had made to her family, right? And I was on a very fast path. I was, as I said, I was on fire, having finished graduate school very rapidly. And it took me a long time to learn from seeing other people's trajectories that it's, number one, it's not a race. And it's not a race ever against each other. It's always, we do what we can in our lives. And so for Jennifer, it was very important for her to start her family and complete her PhD. And I admire her enormously for doing those two things together. And I learned a lot from her, though it took a long time for those things to settle in and for me to really realize that, the kind of life that I had chosen, working in an R1 PhD program with the pressure to publish and stuff like that, that was a path that I chose for myself that I was enjoying enormously, but that path wasn't the path for everybody. And to be able to support graduate students on whatever, in whatever direction they choose to go and what they want to follow. It's often hard in the, for many students in a PhD program, because you're in a PhD program, you're in that R1 environment, you're breathing that rarefied air, and it's often challenging to find your own path differently from that. It was for me, because I stayed in that for a long time until I chose to leave it.
Sure.
So it's taken me a long time to learn the importance of making those decisions very, very differently.
But you learned anyway, and I guess with only about a minute to go, I'm going to ask you to reflect upon the things that you've learned, and if there's a bit of advice you can give prospective geography students or even colleagues. Is there?
Oh, well, if any one of us didn't have advice for students, then we're really in the wrong line of work. I mean, I really, I think that it's important to be in touch with what it is that we most want and what contribution we want that to make at what level and who we want to be reaching, because it's not possible to reach everyone with every message. So I see my teaching as reaching a particular audience of students. I see my scholarship in geography as reaching a particular audience of cultural geographers who I want to be in dialogue with. I see my work on qualitative research, particularly the digital programming that we've been able to develop with the AAG during the pandemic, that I'm just so inspired by and really proud of being able to have been part of since its initiation. The digital methods trainings, seminars that we've offered, just been really amazing, reaching hundreds of students around the world. That's a much bigger world than only cultural geographers. So opening that outward, teaching students who I would never have in my class, and teaching and helping them in their careers that they may not be in my subfield at all. So that's reaching a different group of people, with my community-based work, whether it's with Bodie State Historic Park or the Museum of Neon Art. I serve on the Los Angeles Neighborhood Council for the neighborhood of Lincoln Heights, where I live. We are elected representatives of the city. So community and political engagement is really important in my life. All those are different audiences. All those are different contributions that I try to make. It's hard to juggle all those things at one time, but it's like a real juggler who starts with a hacky sack. You don't go to running chainsaws until you're really good at it. So I build, I have built over time my ability to make these different contributions and to understand them as contributions, and to understand my life and my career as one, not of building my career, but as one of giving to other people and to communities, different communities at different scales and different people at different times. And I feel that when I understand my life and my work that way, that's when it's the most rewarding to me. So to the degree that someone can think of their work that way and think of what are the contributions, so that the contribution, I haven't even mentioned contributions I feel I make to my own family. I hope we all make those contributions, but there are times in my life when my family has been, when there's a crisis, then that's the first thing that matters, right? And so we make those shifts, and each of these audiences, if you will, each of these communities, each of these people, each of these outlets, each of these audiences is different. And they take priority at different times, but they can also be built into a sort of a portfolio of a life and a career that I think can be deeply meaningful, and hopefully in some small ways also transformative in making positive change and in helping people and communities.
Indeed. It appears that your mentor as an undergraduate at UCLA really hit the ball home, and inspiring students to really make contributions. And maybe you would have done it anyway, but indeed, giving to others is certainly key. Dydia, thank you so very much for joining us today. I'm sure there will be many that will view this that will appreciate the words you've shared. And this concludes our conversation with the geographer, with Dydia DeLyser. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. It's been such a pleasure. I'm really honored to have been chosen to be interviewed and for you to take the time. Thank you so much.